Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. 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 Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class.
Good morning, good afternoon, no matter where you are. I am Terance Shipman. It's been a long time coming. We haven't done the podcast in a while, and I want to say welcome back. Welcome back, and today, I'm all alone. The Miss Talented and Beautiful Miss Prudence Williams is not with me today because I have a special podcast for you, and I'll tell you about it in 1 second. But first, I want to say hello to all the people in South America. We got about 5 countries in South America who tune in to us. We have 11 countries on the continent of Africa who listen to this great podcast. We also have 8 countries in Asia, all over the great world. Europe, it's about 8 countries in Europe who listen to us. And in the good old United States, we have 46 states out of 50 who have listened to this podcast. And I want to say thank you. And hey, please, you tell 2 people. Guess what? They'll tell 2 people. Before you know it, we will have a huge audience all over this world. I want a special thank you to the people of Atlanta, Georgia. You are the number 1 people who listen to the podcast. New York, guess what? You are right behind Atlanta. Go New York and San Francisco. Thank you. You are number 3 city in the United States. Now, before I start, I want to make sure you know how you can reach me. Please visit the website at www.teranceshipman.com. Visit the website, join, leave a message. We like to get on there and see the people from all over the world. It is a delight to see that people are visiting the website and buy some of the merchandise, buy books. We have the new book and the old book. And also, you can catch me on Facebook, YouTube. Oh, please go to the YouTube channel. Check out some of the videos. Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google+. And again, thank you all very much for listening to us and giving us your very best. And please, you tell 2 people, they'll tell 2 people. Before you know it, we will have reached the audience of 1 million people. Right now, we have been on since last April. We have reached over 6,000 people across this world. Help us get our numbers up. Let's start just saying, hey, let's get 20,000. Let's go ahead and get 20. And once we get 20, we'll keep on growing. All right, today's program. I have a very special program for you today. You're going to get a sample of the second book, Mr. Shipman's Kindergarten Chronicles, The First Day of School, which is narrated by the great and the wonderful Cheryl, Dr. Cheryl Anderson, who has her book coming out soon. And I'm going to not tell you too much about it, but I saw it today. It is quite beautiful. It's going to be a fantastic book. She will be the second artist to come out on Team Shipman Publishing. Now, you will get a sample of the audiobook, Mr. Shipman's Kindergarten Chronicles, The First Day of School. I hope you enjoy. Give us feedback when it's over. Remember, go to our social media. Go to the website. Leave your contacts and talk to us. Let us know who you are. Thank you. And I'll see you when the podcast is over.
Forward. The first day of school is a universal experience. Most people across the country and the world have felt the excitement of the first day of school. I asked my mother, Clotilde S. Davis, if she remembered her first day of school. She told me that she did, and that her older sister had to register and take her to school because my grandmother had to work. My mother said I was excited about going to school. I was very eager to learn. I also remember my daughter's first day of school. It was the only time in my teaching career that I missed the first day of school and missed the excitement of greeting my kindergarten students. But I had to go see my own little girl's first day of school. She cried that day, and I think I did too. I still have the Polaroid picture from that day. The first day of school is a very important and special day for all students. I hope this book brings back memories that parents and grandparents can share with their children. I hope the book builds energy and eagerness for little ones who are approaching their first day. And I hope the book serves as a guide for new teachers as they prepare for their first day with students. But mostly, I want readers and picture lookers to enjoy this book. It's a new classic. Sincerely, Terance Shipman, EDD. Dedication. This book is dedicated to Mrs. Hazel Herring Williams Alexander, a veteran teacher who celebrated over 30 first days of school. As a teacher, Mrs. Williams touched the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of students, and the memory of her class and her instruction brings smiles to those students' faces even today. Teaching in the states of Florida and Georgia, Mrs. Williams was a mentor, teacher, and an inspiration for many students. This book, like Mrs. Williams, exemplifies what good teaching is and the value of a good teacher.
Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. 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 Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class.
Little brother, I think you are ready for school, Bernicia said to her young brother Dwayne as she came into the living room lugging bags full of school supplies. Dwayne smiled and sat down on the floor next to his sister and started peeping into the bags. I got crayons, pencils, a pencil sharpener, a pencil case, and a book bag with my favorite superhero on it. He bubbled, filled with excitement. I can't wait to meet my new teacher. Kindergarten is a big year, Dwayne. I know you'll do great. Bernicia encouraged as she wrapped her arm around his shoulder, giving him a hug. Hey, Mom, she yelled towards the kitchen. Who's his teacher anyways? Their mom entered the room smiling at her kids. Now you know it's Mr. Shipman. I told them I wanted no one else but him. He taught you and your sister Bracola. There was no way I was letting anyone else be his kindergarten teacher, she said to her daughter with her hands on her hips and her face set with serious happiness. Dwayne's little head lifted from the notebook he'd been checking out, and he turned to his sister and asked, Who's Mr. Shipman? Bernicia crossed her legs and smiled. He was my kindergarten teacher. He is my all-time favorite teacher, and now you get to have him. Their mother sat down on the sofa, and Dwayne moved to sit on her lap and let her help him put paper in his new blue notebook with the dragon on the front. Bernicia, he said, his voice filled with wonder and curiosity. How's kindergarten? What will we learn? What do you do? Is Mr. Shipman mean? Bernicia looked at their mom, who chuckled at Dwayne's shaky voice and wide eyes. She knew her little brother was scared, and she decided to tell him about how great her first day of school was in Mr. Shipman's class. Moving to the sofa with her mom and Dwayne, Bernicia began to reflect on her first day of kindergarten. "On my first day of kindergarten," Bernicia sang, "I was so excited about going to school." Mom and I walked down this long hallway. I had on new shoes and a new jean skirt. Mama had my hair in my favorite style, and I held her hand as we walked. There were parents and kids everywhere. When we finally got to Mr. Shipman's room, there was a crowd of people around him. All these parents and kids trying to meet him. Some of them were crying, parents and their kids. Some were laughing and taking pictures, but all of us were excited about being there. The outside of Mr. Shipman's classroom had red, white, and blue colors like the 4th of July. Dwayne listened closely, absorbing every word his sister said. Mr. Shipman was this tall young black man with this big mustache. Bernicia smiled as she continued. He was smiling at everyone. I watched him while we waited in line. He smiled at everyone and knelt down to the kids. Some of the parents knew him because he taught their older kids, but for others, you could tell it was their first time. Snuggling in his mom's arms, Dwayne whispered, "How could you tell it was their first time, Bernicia?" "Well," she continued, "you could just tell. The parents who'd done it before shook Mr. Shipman's hand and said goodbye to their kids. But the new parents, they just didn't leave. They acted like they didn't know how to leave." She shrugged her shoulders and kept telling her story. This one little girl's daddy dropped her off and she went inside. But as soon as she left and went into the classroom, the daddy began to cry. And then he told Mr. Shipman to take care of his baby girl. Mr. Shipman looked at him real serious like, shook his hand and said, "I will." She shook her head, quite sure she didn't understand parents. Then it was my turn to meet him. Mr. Shipman knelt down in front of me, smiled, and said, "Good morning, sunshine. What's your name?" Their mother interrupted Bernicia, laughing about that first day in Mr. Shipman's class. Bernicia was holding on to my leg and acted like she didn't know how to talk, so I gave her a little nudge and told her to go on and speak to Mr. Shipman. Bernicia sighed. "Mama, let me tell it." I said, "My name is Bernicia," and I shook his hand, looked at him, and just like that, I wasn't scared no more. He had the nicest eyes and smile, and I got a feeling that it was going to be a great year. She smiled and picked up Dwayne's pencil box, pencils, and helped him put the freshly sharpened pencils in the bright red box with the crayons and glue. "Mr. Shipman was the greatest," Bernicia continued. "Welcome to kindergarten," he said. I was ready. I hugged Mama, waved bye, and went into the classroom. When I went in, I looked around, and I knew I was going to like kindergarten. There was music playing, the room was full of colors, different pictures, shapes, and numbers covered the walls. A ship was hanging from the ceiling, and there were colorful rugs on the floor. Dwayne closed his eyes and imagined a huge pirate ship with real pirates hanging from the ceiling. He didn't know if he'd like that or not, so he opened his eyes and looked up at his mom and sister. They didn't seem scared at all. They were smiling and watching him. "So what did you do after you looked around?" he asked, still not sold on this whole kindergarten thing, considering that now there may be pirates. "I saw a little girl whose daddy had cried, and she was crying too. So I walked over to her, sat down, and asked her her name. She said her name was Cherie." "Your friend Cherie who comes over to listen to music with you?" Dwayne gasped excitedly. "Yeah, that's Cherie," Bernicia giggled. "We've known each other since then. You'll make a lot of friends in kindergarten, and some you'll know a long time. But anyway, Let me finish the story." She tickled his feet and continued. I looked at Cherie, and she was just crying and crying, and I said, "Cherie, stop crying. We will be all right. Mr. Shipman's a nice man, and he told your daddy he'd take care of you." Cherie looked up at me. I smiled and told her my name. She stopped crying, and we've been friends since that day. Excited once again, Dwayne turned to his mom, smiling and curious. "Mama, do you think I'll meet a new friend in Mr. Shipman's room?" His mom tilted her head like she always did and kissed his cheek, replying, "I bet you'll make 2 or 3 new friends." Bernicia nodded and carried on. "Well, there was this lady in the room. She was nice with pretty brown skin and sweet eyes. I didn't know who she was, but she walked right up to me and Cherie and gave us some paper and crayons. I already had crayons in my book bag, but I took hers because I didn't know what else to do." "Well, hello," she said. "And what are your names?" she asked. I looked at Cherie, she looked at me, and we told her our names. "Well, Cherie and Bernicia, I'm Mrs. Andrews. I'll be working in here with Mr. Shipman and with you. Can you young ladies draw a picture of yourselves? We would like a picture of your first day in kindergarten." We both nodded our heads, and I began to color a picture of myself in my red shirt with my new book bag. "Do you think she'll be in my class too?" Dwayne pondered. "What's her name again?" "Mrs. Andrews," Bernicia repeated, "and I'm sure she'll be there. You'll like her too." But back to the story. There were still kids coming in the room. Some of the parents came in with them. I peeked out the classroom door and saw one little boy. He was blond with big brown eyes, and he was crying harder than Cherie had been. I watched him, his mom, and Mr. Shipman. I could tell his mom didn't want to let him go. She was scared. "Must have been her first time," Dwayne blurted out. "Well, maybe, but either way, they were both crying really hard, and it wasn't even their turn in line yet." Finally, Mrs. Andrews went over and talked softly to the mom. She looked at Mrs. Andrews, at Mr. Shipman, and then at her son, and finally let Mrs. Andrews lead them into the classroom. They didn't even speak to Mr. Shipman. I thought that was a little weird. "Sounds a little rude to me," Mama added, looking like she didn't like that part of the story. "Yeah, well, maybe, but I don't know." The boy and his mom came in, and she sat at a table with him, but they both still kept crying. Bernicia shook her head and continued. Mr. Shipman finally came in the room just as the morning announcements came on. "What are morning announcements?" Dwayne questioned, causing his mother and sister to laugh. "Not morning announcements, morning announcements," Bernicia said slowly. "It's when the principal talks to the whole school on the speaker in the morning. They do it every morning." "Oh," Dwayne said, jumping down off the sofa and grabbing his book bag. Bernicia grinned at her little brother and went on with the story of the first day of kindergarten in Mr. Shipman's room. Mr. Shipman asked the parents to say goodbye to their children, and Mrs. Andrews had to hold Clifford, the little boy who was crying with his mom. She just rocked him and told him he'd be okay. I was really proud of myself then because I didn't cry when Mama left. "That's right, baby. You didn't cry. Neither did your sister," Mom said, and then she nodded at Dwayne. "And you won't either, big guy. You're going to do just fine." "I know I will," Dwayne boasted, puffing up his little chest and whipping his book bag, trying it on for size. "Well, Clifford cried," Bernicia stated. "He and his mom. Then when she left, he stopped." He still sat on Mrs. Andrews' lap. but he wasn't crying anymore. Mr. Shipman had us all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. We had no idea what that was, but we did it. After we sat down, Mr. Shipman was still standing. Bernicia stood imitating Mr. Shipman. "Good morning, class," she bellowed. And he was smiling the whole time. And we smiled back at him. Cherie giggled, and even Clifford started to smile. She strolled back and forth in front of the sofa across the living room, stretching herself tall and smiling, trying to move and speak like Mr. Shipman had when she was in his kindergarten class. "I woke up this morning and I asked myself, Mr. Shipman, is today going to be a good day or a bad day?" She held her arms wide and continued to mimic her teacher, booming with glee. "A good day." Then this kid named Cameron jumped up, all excited and happy, and yelled, "Yes, it's going to be a good day." Mr. Shipman smiled, but he didn't stop. "Class, repeat after me. Today will be a good day. Point to somebody and say, today you will have a marvelous day." She strutted towards Dwayne, doing her best imitation of her favorite teacher, and leaned forward, smiling brightly, and cheered. "Point to somebody else and say, today you will have a fantastic day. Now give yourselves a hand." She began to clap, and so did Dwayne, as he became more and more excited about his first day of kindergarten in Mr. Shipman's class. Clifford was still sitting in Mrs. Andrews' lap, but he was smiling, and parents were still standing at the door peeping in, and most of them were smiling. Me and Cherie were laughing and holding hands. We just knew it was going to be a good day. The principal came on again and announced that it was time for all parents to leave the building. And even though Clifford wasn't even crying, his mom was the last to leave. She wasn't smiling, but she did finally go. Well, maybe for a minute, then he noticed she was going to leave and started crying for her again. We all covered our ears, but Mrs. Andrews had him calm down in no time. She was really good at that. In no time, he was grinning again and enjoying his first day of kindergarten in Mr. Shipman's room. But he did keep on saying he wanted his mama. "So is that all you do in kindergarten?" Dwayne asked. "Well, no, silly. That day we did a whole lot more. We had circle time." "Is that when you practice spinning in circles?" Dwayne giggled, tickling himself with his joke. "You are silly today," his mom said, pulling him back on the sofa and cuddling him close. "Circle time is when we sit on the floor in a circle and talk to each other, read books, sing, or whatever the teacher tells you to do. On the first day in Mr. Shipman's class, we introduced ourselves during circle time. Mrs. Andrews went first. Clifford wouldn't speak to the class, but we all said good morning to him. I remember everyone in that class. There was David, Mesa, William, Cherie, Hayden, Joseph, Tatiana, Alicia, Autumn, Serafina, Leandra, Cameron, Jamarcus, and of course Clifford. I remember Cherie and I were black, and so were Alicia, Leandra, Cameron, Hayden, Jamarcus, and Autumn. Tatiana and Serafina were multicultural. William, Tiffany, Clifford, and David were white. Joseph was Asian, and Mesa was Hispanic. Jamarcus was taller than everyone, and Leandra was kind of chubby but cute. Cherie looked so little. She was short. We were all different shapes, sizes, and colors, but we were all kindergartners, and we all were excited. "I'm going to be the tallest in my class," Dwayne proclaimed. "Well, maybe you will be, but don't be like Jamarcus. While we were at circle time, he tried to get up and go play with the toys." "They're toys?" Dwayne squealed, leaning forward, eyes wide and smiling widely. "Yes, lots of toys. I almost got out of my seat to play with them too. But don't play with them until Mr. Shipman tells you you can, or you'll get in trouble like Jamarcus did at circle time. Mr. Shipman had to tell him to come back to the circle. He looked so sad. Then Mr. Shipman told him not to be sad because we'd play with the toys later, but we had to learn to sit and wait. Dwayne nodded, focusing hard on what his sister was saying. Then after we finished telling everyone our names and saying good morning, Mr. Shipman began to teach us songs to sing. It was fun. Then after we sang for a while, we got up and took a restroom break. We saw all the other classes in the hallway, and that was cool because we realized that we knew a lot of the other kids in kindergarten from our neighborhoods, and we were all waving at each other. But we couldn't talk because Mr. Shipman had told us how important it was to be on silent in the hallways. Bernicia, their mother asked, was Mrs. Andrews still holding Clifford? Bernicia sighed and giggled. No. He finally stopped crying and was just holding her hand. But every 5 minutes he asked, when do we get to go home? Mrs. Andrews would hug him, and Mr. Shipman would say, later today, Clifford, and smile. Poor Clifford, Mom said, shaking her head. You'll enjoy tomorrow, Dwayne. Don't you worry about coming home. Just enjoy being in kindergarten. I think I will, Mom, Dwayne stated with pride. So after we went to the bathroom, we went on a building tour, which was kind of fun. Mr. Shipman took us to see the principal, Dr. Luck, and the assistant principal, Mrs. Johnson. They were so nice. Dr. Luck said, welcome to Tiny Lester Elementary School. I'm so very glad that you're here. And Mrs. Johnson said, you have 2 very good teachers. They smiled at us and then shook our hands. Then we went into the library. It was in the center of the school. I'd never seen so many books. Mrs. Hayward was a librarian, and she was reading to a class when we came in. But when she saw us, she waved and said, well, hello, Team Shipman. Mesa asked Mrs. Andrews, what was Team Shipman? She explained to us that the class, our parents, and Mr. Shipman, we were Team Shipman. Bernicia smiled and pumped her fist into the air with pride. Will I be on Team Shipman too? Dwayne asked. Yep, you sure will. And that, little brother, is the place to be when you're in kindergarten. We went through the gym and saw the big kids exercising. A tall man came towards us. He wasn't dressed like Mr. Shipman, who had on a suit. This guy had on shorts and a t-shirt that said Laster. He smiled and said, well, look at the new Team Shipman. Good morning. I'm Coach Benford, your PE teacher. Again, Bernicia stood and began to imitate Coach Benford. I look forward to seeing all of you on tomorrow. She smiled and poked out her stomach and leaned back like she remembered her old PE teacher doing. Dwayne imagined that Coach Benford was a big guy with a big tummy. Bernicia, he asked, with his big brown eyes soft and relaxed. What's PE? Well, PE is a class where you go to exercise and play. It's one of the best classes of the day. After Coach Benford talked to us, he and Mr. Shipman shook hands and we went back to the classroom for story time. I love story time, don't I, Mama? Dwayne gushed. Yep, you sure do. Every night you want 2 or 3 stories. Well, you'll have story time almost every day in Mr. Shipman's class. And he's good at reading too. On the first day, Mr. Shipman read us a book about the color brown.
I hope you enjoyed the free sample of the Mr. Shipman's Kindergarten Chronicles, the first day of school. That was Dr. Cheryl Anderson who did the narration, produced by my son, Khalil Shipman. He He was the producer and the engineer of the podcast. Please tune in again next month where we will have Mr. Shipman's Kindergarten Chronicles December celebrations as we begin to get ready for the December holidays. Remember, this was the #1 best-selling book, and we hope you stay tuned to listen to it next month. Please, again, don't forget, you can catch me or visit our website. We love to see people from all over the world visit our website at TeranceShipman.com. You also can catch me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google+. We look forward from hearing you because we just love our audience. And remember, we're trying to reach that goal of getting 20,000 people around this world before the end of the year. We can do it, guys. We can do it. All right. Again, as I always say in closing, you are special, you are smart, and you are somebody. Have a blessed day, and I'll catch you next time on Mr. Shipman's Class.
Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class. Mr. Shipman's class, Mr. Shipman's class.